Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled to welcome you to the Conference Board special webcast series. And my name is Stella Lupushar. I am the Human Capital Analytics Institute leader here at the Conference Board. And before we begin, a few household items. In order for you to effectively participate in this webcast, please ask questions as they occur. They will appear in the chat box at the bottom. The webcast, feel free to download the presentation via the file download on the bottom center of your screen. You may also view the full screen of the PowerPoint at the time by clicking the 4 arrows at the top right of the screen. Please do not forget to complete the evaluation at the end of the presentation so we can incorporate your feedback into the future programs. And lastly, do not forget to share this program with your colleagues. It will be available on demand after the webcast on the Conference Board website. So at this time, I'd like to introduce the topic. We are going to focus during the webcast on the work of the future, myth, reality, and proactivity. I'm really intrigued by the topic, and not only from a professional perspective, but personal perspective. How will that impact myself, my children, and the future generations? I think we're at a very interesting inflection point when it comes to adoption of AI, and we're really, really excited to have a very experienced and prolific expert on the topic who actually recently held and conducted a meeting, a 2-day meeting, to explore further what the impact of artificial intelligence will be on all of us. Please do not forget to stay for the whole duration of the webcast. This is one way that you can get credits from this free credentialing system or organizations. So now let's dive into our conversation. First, I'd love to introduce our speaker, who is Steve Cassidy. Steve is leading the research at BT, and the research is focused on transformation of organization in the future. This program that he's leading, the effort is cross-disciplinary. He looks both from technology perspective and the impact it will have, as well as doing ethnographic studies. All of this with the goal to optimize how the human-machine relationship will evolve and how that will influence the behaviors of the organization as a whole. Previously, Stephen played roles at BT focused on computer-controlled network, platform strategy, technical marketing, proposition development, and program management. So he's not only a practitioner, he's also originally a researcher. He did start at BT as a researcher in optical communications. He published over 60 papers. He wrote 4 books, chapters, contributed to 60 patents, and he's also a winner of Queen's Award for Industry. Another part of his credentials is also he's an educator. He's lecturing the MBA program at the School of Economics and Management at Tsinghua University in Beijing. He teaches also information systems and digital innovation courses at London School of Economics and Political Science. He serves on multiple boards, including our own Human Capital Analytics Institute Advisory Board. So Stephen is exceptionally qualified on this topic to speak and share with us from multiple perspectives. And we're really thrilled to have you here, Stephen. I would love to offer you up to take over the presentation, and all of you on the line, please feel free to add your questions on the bottom left as we progress.
Well, thank you very much, Stella. Generous introduction, and thanks very much to the Conference Board for the opportunity to talk to you today about what future work might look like. It's not specifically a talk about AI, but of course AI is the word on everybody's lips, and hopes and fears for robotics and the effect on displacement potentially of human work. So we all wonder what will happen to our organisation, what will happen to me and my job, what will happen, as I was saying, to our children, what will happen to society. So I've got some subtitles here, myths first. So ever since the invention of generalised computing in the early 20th century and in the lead up to that, utopian and dystopian stories have become an enduring feature in literature and film and popular mythology. And interestingly, as the space age followed that, these ideas became conflated in the public imagination with fears of alien invasions. And these are the sorts of images which underlie our mix of attitudes today to roboticization. And so reality, what's the truth? What is AI capable of? What will it be capable of? Will it not be capable of? Unfortunately, there's no one definition of AI, and everybody's got their own. At its simplest, it's a fashionable term. It's a convenient marketing label for what we used to call data analysis. And at the opposite end of the spectrum, it encompasses all sorts of wild imaginings and fears that keep people interested, but some of which have very little foundation in science. I'll be taking a fairly wide view because I'm more interested in the effect of digital technology in the context of complex organizations and in the context of society. But I will point out some fundamental limits, and both physical, in the world of physics, and human, social, which I think are important to think about in terms of being able to clarify our thoughts about the future. And finally, proactivity. There's no predetermined end state. There's no one future. There's a series of choices ahead of us. And how we make those choices results in different levels of mechanization of jobs, of augmentation of human thinking. And these future choices and decisions that we will make will have a large determinant effect on the future distribution of benefits and the size of benefits to different industries and different sections of society. So we need to think about this in as wide a way as possible. And so particularly, we have agency here. We need to embrace this in all its different aspects and get as many voices in that debate as possible. So I'm very pleased to be able to lay some of these things before you today, and very interested in the debate that will follow. Now, when people think about job replacement, there are basically two sorts of approaches. The first is the analytical approach. There are many versions of this, but this is one of the best from the Oxford Martin School out of Oxford University. And what they've done is to look at a whole series of industries and very carefully decomposed all the tasks and jobs that compose those industries, and then use clever methods to estimate how vulnerable they are to mechanization or machine learning, etc. And it's perhaps no surprise, on the left here we have low probability of computers being able to take over, and on the right, high probability of digitization and digital technology taking over. And you can see a series of no surprises. So things like management, some of the engineering functions, education, healthcare, service, those things which involve human-to-human interaction are most resilient to being replaced by computers. Whereas on the right, some of the more mechanical, logistical, manufacture have the highest. And this is the sort of picture that pessimists like to seize upon. And you can see on the right, they have 47% of high risk to employment. That's great, it's generating headlines. But of course, this is a view, in a way, into the past, not the future. It's analysing jobs which are as they have become through history, and don't tell us anything really about what jobs will become, which is what we'll want to know. So the second approach, which is to use a sort of inductive logic, which just says, well, we've come through these sorts of changes before, and in the end, things have turned out okay. Ever since the Industrial Revolution or the invention of the wheel or whatever it is. And one example, of course, is that I think this is the US. In the year 1900, 40% of the workforce worked on the land, whereas today it's 2%. So if you'd gone back to the year 1900 and said, what's going to happen to those 38% of people, would people have said, oh, well, what will the engineers be doing? They'll be building jet engines, several times the size of a human being. Let alone would they think of this Boeing example with the screens, that these jet engines will be absolutely peppered with little sensors that send real-time information back to the global center and monitor all those engines in flight around the world and book maintenance sessions appropriately, etc. And would anybody have thought that our artists, instead of freezing in rooftop studios in Paris in 1900, will be doing web design, games design, and a whole set of new outlets. But of course, inductive approaches are not the same as deductive approaches, and the future may be different. So we need to think about this carefully. And I thought, well, perhaps we can do better. So I planned a Work of the Future event at the BT headquarters in London, against the background of the level of public debate, which is headline grabbing, and Mark Zuckerberg says, what could possibly be wrong with technology? And he would say that, wouldn't he? And Elon Musk saying, hang on, we need to think about this. We really don't know what's going to happen. This could go sour if we do the right sort of thinking. So the idea was to pull people together and have this debate. And 3 topics that I invited the speakers to think about. The first is that it's a global issue. It's not for any one company to sort of buckle down and work out its future skills plan, but actually this is an issue which covers many industries, the whole of education, the future of the globe, not to put it too strongly. And many institutions need to be part of that debate, representing worker cooperatives, companies, technical suppliers, government, policy, education, etc. The idea was to pull together people from all these sectors. The second was to try and make people more aware that AI is not just about automation, but it has a role in creativity and human creativity in particular. And that becomes true if we make it so, and it doesn't become true if we don't make it so. So trying to get people to think creatively about that. And my third thing was a topic there was a challenge, which says that if we think simple-mindedly about the future, then we think, oh, well, we need lots and lots of data scientists. Everybody's going to compete for data scientists. Wage bills will go up. We'll have to retrain everybody. But you can't retrain the whole workforce. You can't make data scientists out of people that have a completely different mindset. And nor would you want to, because innovation comes from seeing ideas in a whole range of contexts and picking up weak signals. So it's of business benefit as well as social benefit to actually shape the technology to broaden the set of skills that are possible and not just narrow them. And then I'll end the talk with how does this, what does this mean for HR and our practice in particular. So in the audience, we had about 60 different companies, client companies at BTs. We had academics, we had BT people, HR and operations. We had professional institutions like the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development, the Institute of Engineering and Technology. We had science funding bodies, a whole spectrum, and constructed an event of talks and panel sessions to talk about these issues. And I thank the MIT, I worked with the MIT Industrial Liaison Programme to pull together parts of this. And I also thank Stella, my colleague Mary Young. We had several really interesting conversations together as we shaped this up to get the right context. So we had a couple of people from MIT there at the top. Elizabeth Reynolds is one of the directors of the Work of the Future project in MIT, which crosses all disciplines. And we had Daniel Russ, who's the director of the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab in MIT. And we had industry people, Rob McCargo, who is Director of Intelligence, Artificial Intelligence for PwC, but also an advisor to government on the future of AI. Vincent Marais from Paris. Interesting tales there about innovation using people and technology. Our own Ed Jakeman, Director of Voice Services for BT, HR, and people from prominent business schools, part of our university network across the country. And Simon Godfrey there, who's our person facing government, giving presentations. And a very interesting day it was too. Starting with, I'll just say that I've pinched some slides from them with their permission. I've kept their logos at the bottom in acknowledgement of where the sources are. Occasionally you'll see a BT logo, and that's because I'm omitting to putting words in their mouth or adding my own slides. So some megatrends first, looking at social, commercial, demographic forces. We know that the workforce will become more generational and older, more international, more connected. Interestingly, one of the aspects about age and multi-generation is that we will stretch careers both for that reason and because market and technology change over more and more changes during a career. So learnability will become a really significant thing as opposed to specific skills. And the last two bullet points I think are particularly interesting, which is really a striation or sedimentation of people that will do very well and be in a position to push for better work-life balance, but others will be increasingly in insecure employment. And that's a product of the last bullet point, which is that businesses will try and shrink their workforces, permanent workforces, to the minimum and flexibly employ external service providers. You can see that happening. I worry slightly as to what the future is for companies existing on a large proportion of people who don't have an allegiance to that company. And it's a culturally interesting thing, one to watch.
Stephen,
I think it depends what
this will solve
yes?
One of the questions that we got from the chat room. Jyoti was asking, how can I have 3.5-day work week? I think that's pretty much a trend that will drive towards that. On one side,
I think that's yeah, that's interesting. The way these things come out, because if you go back to, I don't know when, never had it so good quote, was that the 60s? I've been after that. The thought was, everybody will be able to, spend one day a week working. But the nature of human beings is not really to share things equitably. And so what's happened is that some people work harder and more people can be out of work or de-skilled. But it is a trend that more people are sort of building different sorts of contracts with their companies to work part-time. I think that's a good thing. So, a spreading of experiences always brings something positive to the workforce.
Exactly.
And some of this sedimentation you can see happening already. There are 4 plots here. The top left is 1950, top right 1980, bottom left 2000, bottom right 2015. And what the blue-grey dots show are the wages of college-educated people, and the red dots are non-college-educated people. And you can see as time goes on, that disparity increases, with its problems. And the left to right axis, horizontal axis on each of these pictures, is population density. So in other words, cities on the right and rural on the left. And whereas it used to be the case that all wages tended to be higher in cities, that's now no longer the case. And what this tells to me is that jobs which involve social contact, dealing with mix of skills, dealing with stochastic networks of people who are picking up weak signals, thinking about things, they benefit. The fact that task-based jobs, large in number, but each one individually doing a task, begin increasingly to lose out. And that goes so far. It's almost preparing these lower jobs for automation. So I think that's also a trend to keep an eye on, to think about. And then finally, the human-machine relationships, technological forces. Digital technology is just a life habit and a means of existing for young people, and that will sort of flow through the workforce and be thought of very pleasantly, perhaps, the way that older people do. So what's a machine good at? So So here's one plot showing that as time's gone on, machines have become ever better at visual recognition. I think that's quite an ambitious-looking plot, but certainly now in limited examples like medicine, like face recognition, voice recognition, the accuracy of computer systems for identification is quite staggering. So let's have a think about that. So Erik Brynjolfsson from MIT had done an analysis of the tasks done by hospital radiologists, and by their reckoning there were 27 tasks, and there are 7 shown here. But only one of them is interpreting images using computer-aided detection. So what the message that Elizabeth Reynolds was giving us was that in most cases jobs will morph. In this particular case, that gives room for more attention of these experts on things like performing intervention procedures, development treatment plans, all the other elements of the task, which can now receive more imagination. And so it's about morphing jobs and not really fully about replacement only.
So Steve, I have a question here. I think 2 things come to mind. Number one, what about the jobs that don't exist today, right? You look at the ONET and these are representative of today's environment, but you know, a lot of jobs that exist today did not exist last year. So that's number one. The second part is, how do you move from job descriptions more towards task-driven economy, and then the skills associated with that? So moving from jobs to tasks, activities, skills.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in the little next sequence, one of the conclusions will be about jobs which emerge from the very nature of the technology, and they're not necessarily technological. So I'll save that to those slides and then bring this out. And I think that the conundrum here is that either, it's like any business, you can rely on very accurate forecasts and plan ahead to those forecasts. Increasingly, companies are sort of moving the dial towards different forms of agility, small a, which say, well, we're decreasingly in the position of being able to forecast. But what we have to do is build the ability to respond quicker. So I would say that, that from what I'm going to say in the little next session, I can point at some jobs that will exist that don't so much now. But for the bulk of it, it's keeping a generalist education and a sort of hunger for knowledge and a curiosity, and finding leadership ways of promoting that and making it okay for people to spend work time to spread their skills. It's those surrounds that prepare you rather than planning ahead. Because we're asked to advise not only universities but schools as to what skills to sort of help them train towards. But I think the word train is itself restrictive, and who knows, I would feel that I was duping at least somebody if I was telling people at school what to train in. It's better to think about agility of mind, critical thinking, thirst for knowledge, curiosity, ability to understand things from the subject, from a number of subject positions.
Ability to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought at this point I'll just say something about how AI works in a non-technical but nevertheless rigorous scientifically way. So we have our AI system, and I'm going to use the example of the radiologist looking at some sort of medical scan, but it also applies to others, as you will see, close analogues. So here we have a patient who has come into the hospital in the past, and that patient has been measured with our ruler, and it's either a scan or whatever measurements that are taken that are relevant. And then those measurements are put in a pile along with the thousands of other patients that are similar, have been similar, and then sorted according to which therapy worked and which therapy didn't work. And that's really what an AI system does. It can do that in very sophisticated ways and very quick ways, and it can certainly do it without tiring and getting bored, which is very significant, but that is what it does. Now our new patient comes along. We measure him according to the same criteria and then work out which pile is the closest one to him and then design that same therapy administered by a person. And you see the analogues here. So this might stand for selecting candidates for employment, or it might be selecting people who are okay to give a loan to, a low risk for giving loans to. And what's interesting here is that this is where bias can come in. So the way those piles have been selected is because of the treatments that are available now. That person, the medic I've shown at the top there, who's determining the pile selection, has also determined what measurements are taken because they're the best ones available at the moment, state of medical knowledge. So the whole system has the embedded knowledge of medical knowledge at the time. And I'll just point out that's different from things like chess playing, where the full knowledge is known. Here we're measuring a complex system, and we've just made a selection of the parameters which make sense about state of knowledge at the time. And so if our selection of candidates has been biased in the past by gender or race or background or zip code, then the AI system cannot do otherwise but to replicate that bias into the future. So one of the areas of jobs I think that will exist, which that don't have close analogues now, is how do you build the disciplines that unbuild bias? What's the data training regimes? How does the whole system work? How do ethics connect to this? How does legal frameworks help protect? How do you make the people able to query what algorithms have done so that they can be reassured? So shrinking that down to the bottom, the other thing to point out is that it needs stability. To make a decision which has some statistical accuracy, you need a lot of data, which is always the power of the computer. But it needs a stable path. You need that state of embedded knowledge not to change. So it's not a mechanism for new knowledge. And interestingly, in the medical field, there have been examples where improving the resolution of body scans actually throw out errors in the AI system because the AI system didn't learn on that resolution. So there's all sorts of levels of thinking and protection that we need to bear in mind.
And that resonated really well with Joanne on the line. She said, you just have panic, gave me panic, as I feel that if a computer is going to decide whether I have a tumor or not based upon the past x-rays, and a medical doctor is not going to review, there will be people who will be missed who have tumors.
Very, very true, yes. And part of the surround system design needs to be able to, for the algorithm to admit when its state of knowledge in a particular choice is not as good as it should be, and to call in an expert. So all these system and organizational design pieces and skill design need to flow from it, exactly. When it comes to the future, and not sticking with embedded knowledge as we know it today, then we need to carry on researching, generating new knowledge. And I think another thing that's really interesting is how is it that you continually build new knowledge into embedded knowledge in the system? And you can't do that without reducing the efficiency of that system. And how do you make those either medical or just simply commercial judgments? So there's a whole new set of issues. And wearing a sort of human and HR sort of hat, how do you make sure that the people who are doing that do so from a sense of purpose in their lives, which might be rewards or professional status, so it might be driven by empathy, commercial rewards, fulfillment. And I think the job of leadership becomes being able to stitch all these vertical elements together. So making sure that routes to purpose still exist for people, generating new knowledge, you can connect to the system is correctly trained, debiased, and allowed to change. So I think that's one area where there will be new jobs. And we we miss those out at our peril, I think. So when we go back to the radiologists, so 26 of the tasks are the human world, dynamic, emergent. There's no trail of data because we're generating the future. And the machine world is doing one task. There's a little bit in the middle there about the machine's contribution to new knowledge, and I'll mention that later on. So here's a plot of GDP growth, and the little horizontal plots at the bottom on there are task content of jobs. And for the 40 years, 47 to 87, productivity and wages grew a nice linear way, 100%. And since then, the growth has slowed. And this is a whole lot of factors. So union power, big one is the global economies, maybe global forces economically, competition being global. But it's interesting that it correlates with the little red plot at the bottom, which is a reduction in task content. So it says to me that, similar to what we have just been saying, that we've, at least an element of this is consistent with saying that attention is being given to price reduction, and maybe that's for the global competition, rather than value generation. And so I think there are signs there that we really need to think about this aspect in a serious way. So where's what are the skills that are growing in value? It's really interesting to see this in data. Our intuition is borne out by evidence. So if you look at the changes in employment share, the top of the two graphs, as time has gone on, that spread, and the top line there is people who have both social and mathematical skills. So they have the critical thinking and the maths and the logic and that element, but also an ability to understand different perspectives, deal with a range of people, understand things from a number of domain positions. The second line down is people who have mathematical skills only, so they're doing very well. It's part of the world we're in, but not as good as those who do both. And the third line down is people who have social skills only, I beg your pardon. The third one down is mathematical skills only, and the bottom one is people who have neither. And the same sort of patterns reflected in wages. So it's saying that, along with what we're saying, it is becoming the case that social, backed up by mathematical skills, are becoming more and more important. And I think that perhaps answers our first question you posed, Stella, which is how do we prepare for the future? And it's this mix of we need to socialise kids, make their education less task-driven, maybe less targeted in that obvious way, less like training, and more about social, about broad understandings, and about critical thinking behind that as a way of preparing rather than pretending to know exactly what will be required in the future. Now this is this slightly unprepossessing building here is a telephone exchange, and this illustrates the point about the maths and social skills. So this little telephone exchange, the size of a shed, is in some rather rainy-looking village in Scotland, and it's a story told by at the event by our Director of Voice Services in the UK. And this exchange started to have faults, and these cascaded over a startlingly short time, and eventually the whole exchange ceased. So after the local people had tried everything they possibly could, they sent for people from our labs 500 miles to the south, who went up there and got stuck in, and eventually they did fix it. They brought their sleeping bags and slept in that building because they were determined to sort it out. And they were determined to sort it out because of exactly that mix of skills. They were very intrigued by like quasi-mathematical puzzles, technical problems, but they also have a very, very strong culture of not wanting customers not to be able to make phone calls. It's really, I've done interviews with people, and that's a surprisingly strong ethic. So it's that kind of mix that gives you success. And what was interesting from a technical point of view here with regards to AI was that this only affected fewer than 200 people. So it wasn't commercially that important in the cold light of day. it wasn't a problem that had ever happened before. So there was no data trail. Certainly you could use sort of computer technology, digital technology to throw light on what it wasn't and help guide. But there was nothing in the statistical record which said this is a problem of this type, this is how you solve it, because it had never occurred. And that requires this human sort of real world knowledge to build up. So that was a really interesting example. And backing that up, there's a nice plot here where the blue lines are, if like, they're called fluid mental capability, dropping off alarmingly with age. I don't like to look too closely at it. And the red warm lines are the sort of mental capability that grow with age, right to age 70. So this time. And what's interesting is that if you read what the blue coloured lines are, the speed of processing, working memory, long-term memory, you may as well call it disk space. Effectively, you're talking about the computing power of the human brain, which, as we know, will be augmented. And the warm coloured lines are world knowledge, social knowledge, verbal knowledge, which grows. And I thought it basically tells us that we become more human as we get older. And I think it was this sort of mix here that made those engineers successful in bringing that telephone exchange back online.
One thought that comes to mind is that it's number one, having multiple generations of and capabilities, as well as augmentation with technology. I think that's where the beauty comes, and that's where the breakthrough ideas will come from. It's not one or the other.
Exactly. Yes, that's right. And I suppose in organisations in the past we've had, archetypically senior people in senior positions who are like the warm line people, and they farm out tasks to younger, more quick-thinking people to solve problems. But there's a potential here to connect people across those areas better using the technology if we exploit it in the right way. And I think that's a really important point. So this same director of voice services has a big job on his plate, which is to, within 10 years, move the entire technology of the telephony network in the UK to a replacement technology. And this touches every part of the company. So the employment of skills, where maintenance engineers are employed, which affects their driving, their efficiency. It's a huge energy bill, carbon commitments that we have made as a company, service levels, the movement of spares because technology is not manufactured anymore. Several technologies involved, where the replacement technology exists. So there's a whole load of different areas in the company, quite disparate, which are affected by the order in which this took place. And so we were brought in to look at this. Our CEO called it the greatest engineering challenge of a generation. Ed himself called it the greatest leadership challenge of a generation, because it was basically trying to get an organisation which had been about service delivery to become one that executed technological change, and that was a big step. So the way we approached this was to go from augmentation of roles to augmentation of teams. So I've represented this here by just chosen 3 of the domains that will be interested. So there's finance on the left, HR or operations in the middle, and on the right, service levels. And the way it works is that finance and operations make some kind of agreement, which they need to do in cell rather than plenary. And the operations make some sort of agreement with service, and then service has to make an agreement with finance, but that, of course, changes the original agreement. And with all the 7 different domains that we're looking at in the company, the decision was not converging. So ideally, we have the person in the middle there, who's some super brain, who can instantly explain the consequence on all the others of whatever level of complexity of restraint that they come up with. So what we did was we built a digitized version of this person, not replacing them because this person didn't exist. And this computer, let's call it, was able to display back in near real time the consequence of ideas that set of people would come up with. So somebody would say, let's try this. And the computer would say, if you do that, that's the effect on HR, that's the effect on finance, that's the effect on service over the 10 years. And the result of this was, to me, not only bringing decisions to that program, but actually it was the cultural significance that was significant. So people that had not been able to agree, and obviously there's frictions build up, were now in a position to work together and make changes to their own local practices, and were able to successfully sort of reach strategies. And because the model contained, if like, algorithmic versions of the rule sets that those each individual domains use, so engineering rules, financial rules, etc. So people built themselves, if you like, their own thinking into the model, which made them confident of it. And because the model was connected to data, any of those things could change and it could simply be rerun. So it's not a static strategy. Again, it was one that could flex with as things change. And it would give you the whole sequence of moves over the 10 years. Some 17 million of them. And so this is about, a little bit like you said, Stella, about using AI as a way of bringing people together, bringing different domains together, the technical, the non-technical, the world, and so real world stuff and specific technology areas, and bringing in a variety of different skill points to be able to work up towards common decisions.
Another couple of fascinating thoughts come with that images. Number one, the bots, the digital labor is part of your workforce, right? You need to look at them, were he or she, as a component of your workforce planning strategy. That's number one. Number two, as the sophistication level of these algorithms increases, and we interact as human beings with them as if they were part of your team. At what point in time, especially in the service interactions, at what point in time should these bots come out and say, I am a bot, actually, you're interacting not with a human being? Because many times they feel really, really human.
Yes. Well, actually, Philip Stiles, one of the business school, Cambridge Business School, asked the audience, who has a name for their car?
Exactly.
And then for those people who did have a name for it, would you say your car was temperamental? So we already anthropomorphize all sorts of mechanical things. And it's a really interesting point you make about viewing, let's call it Bob, as an employee. Maybe they should pay tax. Because that employer, it has to be he, she, or it, needs careful training, needs to be able to explain why it took an action, and lots of aspects of what we hope are human characteristics, we then require the technology to display, otherwise it's not safe. So it's really interesting, and we do see this as a partner. In this example, the computer is a partner around the table, and not something which is being devolved to, because it can never make a decision on its own. And then, in terms of the customer interface, using a bot as a customer interface, it's a really a key brand choice, really. So we discuss this a lot in the company. Some companies like the bot to be as human as possible without telling you that it's bot. We tend, things vary across our company, but we tend to think, well, we're supposed to be a trust and honesty brand. So there's an argument for making sure that the bot admits to being a bot, so people know what they're dealing with. I was in China recently, and there was a company there that had bots and found them successful, actually, for late payment. to be phoned up by a bot, and people prefer to admit to a bot that they had forgotten a payment and pay it, that the bot was not useful for sales, because that, of course, requires the bot to get more into the mind and the needs of the person being sold to. So it's interesting. I think it will, those sorts of social aspects will probably determine the order of events in terms of bots.
Because bots are not judgmental as humans.
Yes. And the other tale is that was played at our event in London at BT. Rob McCargo played a recording of one of these bots, and we were asked to guess whether this was a real person or a bot. And a lot of people thought, well, that's pretty good. But it was pretty repetitive in what it said and all the things you expect. So it got the bot vote. But in fact, it was a real person. And the machinery of businesses and the ways it likes to keep control on the interaction and on the economics can tend to already turn people into bots. So it's a sort of fuzzy line. And it's, I think the important thing is, if we do anthropomorphize them, then we should expect increasingly human transparency from them. That was about bringing diverse domain skills into a complex decision. This is diversity in a different form. So the last sequence of slides was really about the second of my points at the start, which was about using AI as a partner in innovation. And this is about third. Can we use the technology to spread rather than diminish the range of skills that people can bring to the workforce? So in the middle, there with his face uncovered, is our last CEO, Gavin Patson. The person on the right, I've hidden the others because I didn't get the positive okay for revealing them. The person on the right is a BT engineer in this voice area, who also happens to work for an autism charity. And the two remaining people are people with particular skills, which I'll tell you about. And this was about trying to scale up a sort of automated process, which of course requires lots of qualified Cisco engineers and lots of technical capability, but it wasn't actually solving the problem. So in a very enlightened way, Ed, the director, realized that this was actually about a higher capability in pattern spotting and was not about technical skills. So he worked with the chap on the right, who's the autism charity, to bring in two employees, who suffer from autism, who've never been in any paid work in their lives yet. They came in and they looked at the problem and needed a certain way of being interviewed, needed a certain way, sort of physical environment around them, but set to work and did amazing things and solved these problems as if it were a really complex game they were playing. So this is about, so that's one dimension, but there'll be many more, artists, creative people, different sorts of skills that we need to really think hard about shaping the technology so that different people have a way in and can add their unique skills. So I think it's a really interesting story.
And it also creates financial security for a lot of these individuals who have talents. They're just not part of the bell curve that we hire and bring them into the organization. And it's good for society, it's good for designing better products, it's good for everyone.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it's not a narrow benefit at all. And I think because we've grown out of industrial revolution-shaped companies, we tend to have too regular a view of who we think we should employ and what our product set is, etc. All benefit from being spread out. This was one of the PwC slides. What's holding AI back in business? So vulnerability, biases, governance, trust, societal disruption. What's conspicuous by its absence here is anything about technology. There isn't really a sort of technical limit. There's a limit in how the technology speaks to these issues, which are cultural. So I think that's where our attention needs to be. Just quickly, this is work from Monideepa Tarafdar from Lancaster, who has done studies of individuals and health and well-being. And there's just one word, the phrase on this slide that I think is great, which is continuous partial attention. And the fact that being subject to multiple interrupts sort of reduces productivity and innovation and increases burnout. And these are the sort of things that we anecdotally know, but it's interesting to see it backed by careful research here. But we don't want to reduce it altogether, because the other piece of work she's done is that if people don't receive enough interrupted communication, they suspect they've been forgotten, or that they're being missed out, or they're not being given information on which to act correctly. And so, finding the right position here is going to be really important. And
I think there's one positive thing that goes for us in this situation was all the developments of the brain-to-text interfaces. Yes, that's primarily now in the medical field, but who's to say that it's not going to evolve over time to be used for cosmetics purposes too? So maybe we'll be able to ingest all that content and information much faster.
Yes, I think the ingestion of it and the text summary has to be good, of course, but I think lots of these technologies you can't rely on them to identify the topic and the specific thing we should look at, but they can be used to reduce the volume of spurious stuff that we have to go through. I think it can be used as a useful focusing device as well as an input-output mechanism. So she's pointing out at there's a role for human resource and leadership here, with making digital well-being an important part of work design, which BT is doing, but also coping strategies for individuals. So just finishing by going from individuals up through high levels towards the organisation, what were the top tips from the event? So this is the World Economic Forum via PwC. 10 skills you need to thrive in the 4th Industrial Revolution. So we've got the critical thinking we've been talking about there, complex problem solving, but also creativity, people. I think coordination with others, which is not a simple thing. This is about really understanding the mindset of multiple domains. Valuable skill, the boundary spanners. Emotional intelligence, being able to involve everybody successfully in change, for example. Service negotiation, flexibility. So it's all about sort of open world skills, which has been borne out by several of the graphs we've looked at today. This was from Bert Stiles from the Judge Business School in Cambridge. Interestingly, PwC's information originally. So organisational capabilities, so being trusted by society, major thing, and you can see that AI-driven companies sometimes step over a line there and become untrusted. For the organisation as a whole to display human properties. Great one there is output, not hours. So we're very used in this post-industrial revolution world to count hours, to count output, to count numbers. How do we measure quality and success and measure things like the development of future opportunities, things which are very intangible and not easy to metricate in a numeric way? And that, to me, puts more focus on the nature of leadership and the ethics that exist inside a company. Professionalism, building collaborative environments, work-life balance, etc. And added to this structure that we've looked at individuals, but what's really worth thinking about is actually what are the structures, what are the decision flows in an organisation, upon what data, biased or unbiased, are we basing these decisions? How do these decisions connect to each other and affect each other? So it's not only about individuals, but how do we construct an organisation structurally so that it becomes a learning and creating an acting organisation. I've put a BT logo there just so that you don't think I'm putting words into Philip's mouth. And I also commend you the conference board report written by Mary Young and Sherlyn Nair on why culture and structure matters. It's a really good read, and it speaks to this sort of issue that structural issues need thinking about. And this is, I think, where organisations don't particularly pay much attention. They're more themselves task-based. So from the discussions today, I think we talked about new roles, about data discipline, all the methodologies, the rigour around data and evidence, tracking and removing bias. I said that in a couple of words, but it's really a technically very complex problem. Getting algorithms to explain themselves, risk analysis, how much decision error can you take, and relating ethics and all these things to commercial success, and mixing deep domain skills with analysis, which we've touched on. This means things for leadership. The team is the unit of value, not the individual. So we've got to focus on the team, making it socially sensible, working at the social level, the organisation level, and making individual relationship with this meaningful and important. Building AI as a partner for innovation, growing diversity, and relating a number of interest groups, as we were saying right at the start. So the challenge for HR, which has been historically concentrated on the component level, individuals, the future is about innovation. So we need to think more about structure and information decision flows, as I've been saying, and create an augmented skill around organisation design and exploit this co-creation between culture and technology, and really think about that hard. And the future for HR analytics is take a role in this, not with conjectures, perhaps do organisational experiments, create evidence, and propose investments in organisational capital as well as just human capital. And investments tend to take place in individual profit lines, but is there a role for HR in partnership with the company of making structural investments around AI and people that whose profits don't fall into, or benefits don't fall into those individual lines, but increase the capability of the company. Then finally, we have turned a lot of work into robotics, and as we've been saying, that as more of that becomes automated, we will be forced, as some of the existing trends have already shown us, to be more human, to embrace diversity and bring those different perspectives to the workplace.
Brilliant.
So that's all for me.
In the last minute, we had a question that actually I had it on my list too. How soon do you think this is going to become adopted and become prevalent? And do companies really need to pay attention now, or they have time?
I think my view is that we do take our time, because there's a lot of urgency being felt, which is right, but the urgency should spawn deep thinking rather than haste, because I think the thing that might slow the whole thing is for some big companies, as has happened. You think of the certain things in social media. Things can occur which miss out some of these steps, like trust, transparency, human relationship, which will reveal a failure down the line, which will cause the whole technology to be set back by a technological generation. So I think I've not answered you with a date, but I think the thing to do is not to panic, but actually to pay attention to these cultural and structural surrounds and form a path which becomes stable. Therefore, we can predict better about it by involving a broader conversation in that evolution. Excellent.
So that's a great note to end on. It's all of our responsibility to shape this future and be part of the conversation. To wrap this up, I just want to make an announcement about 2 conferences the conference board is launching, and you as a participant in this webcast have the opportunity to claim a discount. The discount code is KN1, And the first conference is the Annual Leadership Development Conference in June. And the second one is Succession Management Conference that will take place in November in New York. We have a lot more content and resources, and you can download them by clicking on the links on this page or download them from the conference website. With that, I would love to thank Stephen for all your insights and advices, as well as all of you who are on the phone, on the line listening, and hopefully you took some of these advices to heart and will be able to apply them in your day-to-day conversations and decisions that you're making. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.